Have you ever walked through a garden and felt you were a child again? A garden is, after all, a world of the simplest and most lasting pleasures. A world where springtime and summer are never far away. A world where each step promises a new and maybe magical discovery. It is the strong links with childhood and literature which has brought this garden to what it is today. Poulton Hall stands on a site occupied by the same family for over 900 years. The generations of the Lancelin Green family who have looked out across this countryside could doubtless tell us all a thing or two about events in the checkered story of Wirral, a place often regarded in national terms as a wild outpost somewhere beyond Chester, and therefore beyond history. But some people in the past have taken note of the many virtues within Wirral. In 1853, the American writer Nathaniel Hawthorne visited Poulton Hall and wrote of its setting.
The lawn around Poulton Hall is very beautiful, but requires great care to keep it so, being shorn every 3 or 4 days. No other country will ever have this charm of lovely verdure, which almost makes up for the absence of sunshine. Without the constant rain and shadow which strikes us as so dismal, these lawns would be as brown as the autumn leaf.
In the years surrounding the First World War, this walled garden was proudly maintained by a team of gardeners, including Bradshaw, who became head gardener. But for all the care and pride in his work, the way of life and the part he played in it were beginning to change. After the Great War, a new social order began to move across the country. The age of the servant was passing, and the number of staff working on estates like this fell dramatically. The gardens, which had once fed everyone on the estate, were no longer needed. After the Second World War, the garden fell into a steady decline, which, by the late 70s, had brought it to this. It was at this stage that Roger and June Lancelin Green set about the restoration. For Roger, this was the opportunity to recreate the garden he had known and loved as a child. Roger was a very successful writer for children. In particular, he breathed fresh life into many favourite classic stories and legends for a whole new generation of young readers. His dream of bringing back the garden of his earliest years gradually became a reality. But his health was beginning to fail him. However, in those last years, he could look with a great satisfaction on the scenes and images he had regained from childhood. When Roger died, June gathered the impetus once more and had designs drawn up to complete the garden. But now the garden took on an extra meaning, a new dimension. June saw an opportunity to reflect the interests and dedication of her husband. Everywhere there are references to episodes from children's literature. They are direct and unabashed, in the true nature of a child's world. Here, for June and her family, the stories and work of Roger Lancelin Green live on. Tatton Park stands as one of the great estates of Cheshire, formerly the home of the Egerton family and now in the care of Cheshire County Council and the National Trust. One of the biggest attractions, however, is something quite different from the grand scale of a stately garden. The Japanese garden was built about 1910 by labourers brought in specially from Japan. It has a rare authenticity and tells us a great deal about how a simple garden can become a sanctuary, a place of peace and tranquility. There is a timeless and enduring quality which lies in the quiet harmony of rock, stones, plants and trees. No one is quite sure where Alan de Tatton Egerton, who commissioned the building of this garden, got his ideas from. It seems, however, that he was influenced by at least 3 well-known Japanese gardens of the time. Japanese gardens themselves stretch back to the 7th century, when the aristocracy built large gardens landscaped with islands and waterfalls. From the 13th century, the scale gradually reduced until seas and waterfalls came to be represented by gravel and stone. This reduction of size and resources is possibly what fascinates us most. We feel larger than life when we walk among stones which represent hill and mountain tops, and low-growing plants are trimmed to represent rolling hills and valleys. Even the great Mount Fujiyama is only a little taller than we are. The white stones at its peak symbolize the snowy cap of the sacred mount. The reducing scale of the traditional Japanese garden coincided with the development of tea gardens, which were to provide just the right atmosphere for the famous tea ceremony. In order to reach the tea house, guests needed to take a symbolic journey through the garden. They were leaving the everyday world behind and approaching the peace and hospitality to be offered in the tea house. The guests would make their way along the path, which firstly skirted the outer edges of the garden. The stepping stones of the path were small and close together, so that the guests, stepping on each stone as they went, could only make slow progress, and therefore have more time to take in the delights and calming qualities of the garden. The path would then slowly lead them towards the centre island with the tea house, the ultimate objective. Outside was a hole used for tea dregs, although it also had a symbolic purpose to shake off the dust of the world. Some Westerners have interpreted this as meaning a place to throw off frustration and shout obscenities, but this is doubtful. Just before the threshold was a place to lay down the sword. This had enormous significance because the sword was a sign of high station. But beyond these stones, those ranks of the outside world had no meaning. In the world of the tea house, samurai and farmers alike could sit together on equal terms. Flowers play only a small part, as they are the fleeting moment amidst a world much more stable and permanent. No feature is complete in itself, and should therefore never be seen in its entirety. The tea house, for example, will always have a branch or plant to obscure some of its lines. For all the undoubted delicacy and charm of a Japanese garden, there is something about them which strikes a deeper chord. The very heart of such gardens lies in the faith of Shinto, which viewed the world and everything in it, including man, as infused with the forces of creation. The unfortunate irony is that the public are not able to walk in this Japanese garden. It can be viewed all round, but from a higher level. Yet, there is still everything to be seen, certainly enough to arouse interest, and a desire among many to put some of this culture into practice in their own gardens. There is a distinct Japanese flavour to this garden in Wirral. In spite of its quite modest size, Alf and Evelyn have managed to include so much of what is important to them. Evelyn is involved in working with Age Concern. This caring for others and their well-being has doubtless helped to shape the garden as a haven of peace for themselves, friends, neighbours, anyone who needs to calm their troubled mind. Yet not so long ago, this garden was like so many others, a tired lawn surrounded by narrow borders. Then one day, Evelyn suddenly saw things differently. She had taken a day off. The stress of work had caught up with her. To help wind herself down, she took a trip to a local garden centre. And there she was captivated by the statue of a Japanese lady. She took, or rather nursed it home. For the rest of the day and well into the night, she thought about the statue and how she could design the garden round it. And then she realised, with all this preoccupation, her feelings of stress had melted away. And from that day, the garden changed its looks and its role. It became a stress-free zone. For Evelyn, that Japanese lady takes pride of place in a rather special garden where everyone is welcome. The rocks, which are so important and symbolic in Japanese garden design, have taken on their own significance here. Anyone they know who goes on holiday, far or near, is asked not to send a postcard, but instead to bring back a rock. For Alf and Evelyn, there is now a global feel to their garden, a garden which, like their caring and concern for others, stretches out and finds no boundaries. There is a distinct feel of theatre about this garden, an expectation that some prima donna will soon make her appearance and captivate her audience as a tale of high drama begins to unfold. The scene may be the entrance to a great catacomb, or beside the quiet waters of an oriental palace garden. Just as on a stage, everything we see may not be quite what it seems to be. A mirror, for example, can be a subtle way of borrowing space from next door's garden, a kind of stealing with no risk of prosecution. For the owner, Gordon Cook, this suburban garden in Sale is indeed the meeting point between art and nature. This is hardly surprising. Gordon is a noted artist working in ceramics, and it is in his studio that we begin to understand how he creates a world where the work of man and nature depend each upon the other. The patterns and textures of natural forms, often in the garden itself, are the inspiration and influence which will bring shape and design to each new ball of clay. Some of Gordon's works take their place in his garden, from which perhaps the original idea came. Sometimes the work will echo the shapes of the garden. Sometimes it will lend formality and substance which plants alone cannot provide. And that is surely the secret of successful garden design, the almost instinctive knowing when nature needs a helping hand. There are so many views in such a comparatively small garden that the visitor may start to wonder, are they walking through a three-dimensional painting? Whichever way you turn, you are clearly looking at a carefully designed picture. Features designed to intrigue seem to be everywhere. But ultimately, we are drawn to the centrepiece. It took some boldness to design an arch of this size for such a garden. It also took a lot of effort. The wooden forms had to be strong enough to support the steel-reinforced concrete, which, in turn, had to be strong enough to support the soil above. Now, the arch plays many roles. A unique setting for some fine ceramic and slate work. A versatile alternative to a patio, a place to choose sunlight or shade, and even provision to sling a hammock. But most of all, the arch is a focal point for the whole garden, a backdrop against which plants and ceramic forms can give of their best. This is a garden where art and nature come together to captivate visitors and send them home full of ideas and inspirations.